Colombia, the country of Colombia, is making cocaine. They have cocaine manufacturing plants, okay? And then they sell us their cocaine. We appreciate that very much. But yeah, anybody that's doing that and selling it into our country is subject to attack.
President Trump there issuing an implicit threat to strike at drug manufacturing sites in Colombia. His administration has adopted a hardline approach to narcotics smuggling, with US operations so far limited to maritime strikes in the Pacific and in the Caribbean near Venezuela. The US military has targeted several boats that it claims were carrying drugs. This video, released on Thursday by US Southern Command, shows one such strike in the Pacific. But Donald Trump and his officials insist they are prepared to hit targets on land if they believe it's necessary, and not only in Venezuela. Colombia's President, Gustavo Petro, has been sharply critical of the US boat attacks, which he says have killed Colombian citizens. President Trump's suggestion that he could authorize strikes inside Colombia prompted a furious response.
Here we defend our sovereignty with our lives. And we want to make it clear that Colombia will not be threatened. And anyone who moves from threats to action will only awaken the American jaguar that lies dormant in the hearts of the people.
Let's explore this with Gimena Sánchez, who's a human rights and anti-racism advocate at the Washington office on Latin America. Welcome to DW. Have US-Colombia relations seen anything like this before? An American president openly suggesting striking drug production sites inside the country.
No, the US and Colombia have had a marvelous relationship, a very close relationship. And Colombia has been the US's #1 ally in the anti-narcotics fight for the past 3 decades.
Right, so if the US were to conduct even a limited strike on Colombian territory, what do you think that would do to bilateral cooperation on counter-narcotics and security?
Well, first of all, it would be completely counterproductive to addressing the drug issue. This is a transnational criminal problem that involves multiple different countries. And the US has its culpability as well, if you want to look at it that way, in the sense that it provides the incentives for this trade to flourish, because the US is the market which is buying a lot of the cocaine. Secondly, the military and security approach has been tried already, not directly by the US, but indirectly through a Plan Colombia from the year 2000 to the year 2015, whereby the US spent over $10 billion to support the Colombian armed forces in an anti-narcotics effort, with the idea that if you strike the coca plant and you go behind the drug cartel, in particular the FARC cartel, with military force, somehow this is going to make the cocaine so expensive in the United States that nobody's going to buy it. That has completely failed. And as we know, that just made coca production spread throughout the country during that period. And now we have multiple other cartels and narco trafficking groups operating in Colombia. It was only through the 2015 peace agreement that we saw the possibility of actually trying to dismantle the drug trade, looking at it in the holistic, integral way in which it requires on multi-levels, that we started seeing the possibility of making a dent in this problem.
Right. So to people who would say, if we're all agreed that drugs bad, let's just wipe out the drug plantations, bomb them if necessary. You would say, well, you might do that, but the effect would be that you spread it and the trade actually proliferates. That would be your argument against just nuking them.
Correct. Well, first of all, through the aerial herbicide program, there was an effort to do away with the coca crops. That not only did not do away with the coca crops, because coca is something that grows very easily in Colombia and in the Andes region and very hard to control, but also because it wasn't addressing the root causes of the problem as to why people are involved in the drug trade. Not just the marginalized rural farmer who grows the actual coca plant, but everyone in the chain that is needed. This comes out of a situation of major inequality and a lack of access to services and basic necessities of a lot of people who are forced into this trade in many ways. And also because in Colombia, you've never had a fully realized land reform, and you have less than 1% basically occupying most of the lands in the country, and much of the population unable to have access to those lands and own those lands, that it's made social mobility very difficult for people. So you would be attacking basically something on the surface that will just regrow in
Right.
another way with other actors
And
that
I beg your pardon, how are people thinking about this issue of America sort of standing, looking over their shoulder and saying, behave yourself or we'll start shooting? Because, how do these sorts of incidents, the shooting of these drug boats, how does that shape public opinion in Colombia about cooperating with Washington on drug issues?
Well, the relationship between the US and Colombia started to torpedo itself basically at the beginning of the second Trump administration, mainly because of ideological reasons and a lot of tit for tat and fights over Twitter that went from 0 to 360 in 5 minutes, mostly because President Petro spoke his mind about several issues that President Trump is not agreeable with, one being Israel, another being the migration and treatment of migrants in the United States. And then this completely devolved into a situation that is very unfortunate, where basically the US decertified Colombia on meeting the demands on drugs this year, which was a major political embarrassment for the government. And also a really huge mistake because the US needs Colombia to address the drug trade. And Colombia has been really the most loyal partner that has helped the United States on that front, for the past 4 or more decades.
Right.
And so it's absolutely absurd that Colombia is being treated this way. And it's also completely not going to address the problem that President Trump purportedly is saying he's trying to address.
So let's finish then on that notion of successful cooperation. You said that the two countries have worked well together over decades. What would a constructive US approach from this administration look like? If they were going to tackle it in a holistic way that you believe this problem should be tackled, how would the two governments work together and what would they do?
Well, the first thing that it needs to do is to redouble diplomatic efforts, restart the high-level dialogues that have been a tradition for the past 10 years between Colombia and the United States. Also, it should take into account all of the congressional delegations that have been reports that have been bipartisan that have basically said that the security and mano dura approach doesn't work for drugs. So here are different ways that you can address it through harm reduction, through treating drugs as a public health issue, and also going through the larger people in the drug chain, which ironically, Colombia has had a very high rate of interdictions, and working towards figuring out the financial structures that are corrupted that allow for this drug trade to blossom. And then lastly, it should really implement the drug chapter of the peace agreement from 2016, which may be imperfect, but basically was a major step forward towards trying to address all of the multitude of issues that lead people into the drug trade.
Thank you so much for talking to us, Gimena. Gimena Sanchez from the Washington office on Latin America.
Thank you.